Hey, welcome to Psych 1. Today, if I can remember what we're doing, it is memory. We're talking about memory. Look, here's some stuff that goes with that. All right. So the very first thing I want you to do is remember this word. The word is gamma. No writing things down, nothing like that. Just remember it, keep it in your head. You're a smart person, right? You can keep stuff in your head. All right. What I've tried to do with this document is pull out all of the essential terms from the reading and organize those so that you can just get the essential terms that we need and no nonsense, no fluff, no diagrams, no stories. So here it is, all the concepts that we're going to need to get through the thing and nothing else. Good. So there's a couple of ways to talk about 3 stages of memory, okay? That's going to be confusing because there are different 3 stages of memory, different concepts. But the first 3 stages of memory is encoding, storage, and retrieval. So what I want you to do is think back to chapter 3. If you haven't learned anything else in the class, you should have learned that neurons that fire together wire together. What does that mean? That means you're in the stroller and you're 1 year old and your mom's pushing you and you see a dog for the first time and you point it at it and you go, "What's that?" And your mom goes, "That's a dog," right? And in response to this experience, a collection of neurons fires together and wires together. Now, forever after, if you see a dog, those neurons fire. And if those neurons fire, you see a dog, whether or not there's a dog in the environment, right? You can close your eyes right now and imagine one. And you can probably see it and you can probably feel how fluffy it is. It's so fluffy you're going to die, and you can probably smell it. Dogs have bad breath, all that stuff, right? That's encoded in your brain. Information is encoded in neural networks. That's the encoding stage. Get stuff in. Okay. Great. Neural networks are maintained during sleep. So here we have the storage stage. That is, having encoded the information, you want to keep the information, remember it for later. So neurons that fire together wire together. But how do they do that? Well, remember how neurons work. So over here, we have a neuron, and then we have the long spindly axon, and then it splits off, and then a terminal button at the end of each branch, and each terminal button is going to land in the dendrites of another neuron. But it's not ever going to quite touch it. There's going to be a micron length gap between the terminal button and the dendrite, and that gap is bridged by neurotransmitters across what we call the synapse. So electrons flow down the axon, they break the synaptic vesicles, neurotransmitters flood into the gap, and enough of those neurotransmitters make it all the way to land in the receptor sites, then that circuit is closed, the next neuron in line can fire its electron load and break some synaptic vesicles and all that stuff. Yeah, good? Fabulous. So all night long, while you're sleeping, your brain is grabbing neural networks that have fired during the day and firing them over and over and over again really, really, really fast. Why? Because at this end, every time the receiving end of the synapse gets neurotransmitters, it makes more receptor sites for those neurotransmitters, making it more likely it can gather up enough to fire that electron load, close the circuit. Can you dig it? So it's like the world's weirdest game of baseball. Let's say we start a game of baseball with 4 outfielders, but every time an outfielder successfully catches a ball, you get to put another outfielder right out there next to him. That's what's happening in here, the world's weirdest game of baseball. So the more those neural networks fire, the stronger they become, the deeper are the channels. So that's storage. That's storage. So why would repetition work as a study method? Exactly. Okay. And then we're talking retrieval. How do you get that information back out? Well, imagine a neural network. We fire this neuron and it reaches out to, I don't know, 1,000 other neurons, which each reach out to 1,000 other neurons. Well, how do I get that information? I start with this neuron, don't I? What I want is lots of cues to that piece of information so that I can get it to fire, which can probably get the rest of the things to fire, and then you can pull that information out of your head. Well, that's the retrieval, okay? So the 3 stages of memory: encoding, storage, and retrieval. And they match up pretty well with this biological framework we constructed earlier. All right, so here's an example of an error of retrieval. Errors can happen anywhere along the line, right? You could encode improperly, you switch digits while you're looking at a phone number, and then later, you store it that way, and then later you go to pull it out. Well, you pull out what you encoded, which is something that's wrong. You could have storage errors where just overnight you drank before you went to bed, and so the neurons didn't fire and wire together. Now you don't have access to that piece of information. But here's an example of a retrieval error. This is probably proactive interference. It's that tip of the tongue phenomenon, right? So you're sitting on the couch with the spouse and you're watching a movie and you recognize one of the actors in the movie, but you can't quite get the dude's name. You're like, that guy, I know that guy from, no, not that one, not that one, not that one, that one, the one with the hair. And your partner is just like, you're crazy. Shh, we're trying to enjoy this thing. But it's driving you nuts. You're not crazy yet, but it's driving you that way. You just know who that is. And yeah, it's 1996. You don't have IMDb on your phone. All right, smart guy. All right. So you just, you make popcorn and eat your Junior Mints and try and forget about it. But it nags you and you just can't get the name. You can't figure out where you know the guy from. That's the tip of the tongue phenomenon there, right? Because you know the name and it's right there and you just can't get the information to pop out of your face hole. Happens to me all the time, doesn't it? You've witnessed this live where I know the word and I know the word and I know the word and then I need to say the word and I don't know. Okay. But what else happens is you go to bed early and you're sleeping, but you're old now and your prostate gland is this big. So it's 3 a.m. and you have to pee, right? So you get up and you're sitting in the bathroom by yourself and there's no noise and no one else is awake. And with no distractions and nothing else to think about, that name pops into your head. You stopped thinking about it, stop pushing it away, and it pops in there. And so you yell out at the top of your voice, "It's Kevin Bacon!" And everyone in the house wakes up and they think that you have lost your mind, but you haven't lost your mind. You found your mind in a quiet moment on the toilet in the middle of the night. Okay, so that's tip of the tongue. Has that ever happened to you? I bet that it has. I imagine that it has. So here's a couple of different kinds of memory. We'll have your implicit and your explicit memory. Explicit memory, that's the more obvious one to talk about. Semantic and autobiographical or declarative. So the stuff that you can say, the things that can be said are declarative memories. Semantic memory is facts. Facts you can declare. Who was the president of the United States in 1981? What's the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow? You could say the answers to those questions. You know whether you know them or not. Okay? Autobiographical memories, your memories for yourself in a place at a time, probably doing something. Do you remember if you learned to ride a bicycle, do you remember that happening? Probably you were 5 or 6 years old and your daddy is running along behind you. You have the training wheels off the bike for the first time and your parents running along holding onto the seat and you're pedaling for all you're worth going, "Don't let go, daddy, don't let go." But daddy lets go. He thinks you're ready, you're not ready. You careen into a rose bush, you still have the scars, right? That's autobiographical, your memory of yourself in a place at a time. And you can say it, you can describe those events, okay? Implicit memories are non-declarative memories. It's the stuff that you know that cannot be said, that you don't know that you know. So they might be emotional memories, like when you smell pine sol and have a memory that's attached to that, and it just brings back the sensation, but not the specific autobiographical context. Baking cookies, and it reminds you of grandma, but not an event with grandma in it. That could be motor memories. So riding a bicycle, you probably learned how to ride a bicycle, but could you tell me how to ride a bicycle, right? I'll listen. I'll sit and I'll listen to you tell me how to ride a bicycle. But if I don't already know how to ride a bicycle, what information are you going to give me that's going to help me ride that bicycle? Exactly, none. It can't be said, right? Get on the bike, sit on the seat, scoot forward until it's rolling, put your feet on the pedals, turn the pedals forward. I'm going to fall off, right? Because most of the action of riding a bicycle is not in the frontal lobes where you can process information and give instructions to the motor cortex. It's in the cerebellum doing the unconscious activities of balance and learning how to coordinate with the motor cortex. So you're turning the handlebars just enough and shifting your weight just enough to keep the thing upright. You can't be told how to do that. You have to just do that. So you probably remember learning to ride a bicycle, but if you think about riding a bicycle, you're going to get hurt, right? Okay. And like contextual stuff. So you're in your car, you're in your 1996 Geostorm or whatever it is, and you are fancy pants. You have a 6-disc CD changer in the trunk, because that's how we did it in 96. The album that's playing right now is the Eagles. It's Hotel California. Okay, so you're cruising along and you're cruising along listening to Hotel California, and like New Kid in Town is fading out. Now, if I were to ask you ahead of time to list the order of songs on Hotel California without looking at the back of the CD, you couldn't do it. You couldn't do it. You maybe could get most of the songs, but not in order. There'd be a couple left out. But as New Kid in Town is fading out, you know the next song on that album is Paradise, and you expect that to be fading in, right? The trouble is you loaned your car to your mother yesterday, and she pushed shuffle on the CD player. And so instead of Paradise, you get Ace of Base on an entirely different album, doing I Saw the Sign or something, you know, or All That She Wants Is Another Baby. Okay. So that's implicit and explicit memory. Good. Now we're going to move on to levels of processing. What was that word I asked you to remember at the start of the lecture? Did you remember it? If you did, you're in the minority, because I told you a word to remember, and then we started talking about other stuff and I distracted you. It'd be actually kind of weird if you did remember. The word was gamma. And you can rewind this isn't on tape, but metaphorically rewind the tape and see if I'm right. There we go. So how would you remember a word? There's 3 levels of processing: shallow, medium, and deep. That's all fairly predictable, isn't it? But in shallow processing, you're just trying to remember the word. That is, you have a neural network for the word. You're trying to reinforce that neural network. You're not doing anything about making more cues to hit that keystone neuron, cross over it, cause it to fire. So maybe I ask you to remember fish, and you go fish, fish. Remember fish. Don't forget to remember fish. And then someone comes along, and you have a conversation about something, and you're like, "What was that word?" Damn. It's just totally inadequate. Now, most of the time when you're reading textbooks, we're going to get down here in a second. Most of the time you're reading textbooks, this is what you're doing: is you open the book and you start reading information. You just expect neural networks to flower in your brain and hold on to that information, and you'll remember it later after you've been distracted. And that's why you're not doing so good, okay, with this higher level college material. That's why it is difficult. Because you have to do more than just read the book and expect it to stick, if you're even getting that far. Medium processing, though, now you're starting to try to make different cues to cross over that keystone neuron to make it more likely you can remember the thing. So I say fish, and you go fish, fish rhymes with dish. I'm going to make a fish dish. I wish I had a fish dish. That would be delish. Now you have all these other words, and then later I ask you to remember it, and you go, what was I talking about? Something about food. And then, right? And now you can follow this rabbit hole to the cue and get the word fish out of it with somewhat more likelihood than when you were just trying to remember fish. You've made more cues, the neural network's a little bit more robust. But if you really want to remember things, then deep processing is the way to go. In deep processing, we are trying to connect the word or the concept to something that's important to us, okay? So if you ask me to remember the word fish, I'm going to flash back to China in 2010. And I was at this academic conference in the middle of Shanghai. There's this retreat center in the middle of Shanghai. They have like a 5-mile radius circle just carved out. I don't know if you know anything about Shanghai, but there's like, it's a city of 30 million people, and to be able to carve out housing in that huge zone is inordinately expensive, and it's very, very special to get away from the noise and the hustle and the bustle of the city into this space where you can't hear the traffic anymore or see anything on the periphery. It's incredible. So I'm at this retreat center, and I get left behind at lunchtime, right? I'm doing a thing in a conference, having a conversation with someone afterwards, and then I go out for the bus. The bus is left without me. I don't get lunch that day. So I'm sort of moping around the retreat center, and one of the workers pushing a broom or something happens to speak English. They're like, "God, left behind, didn't you?" Yeah. You know what you should do? You should go up to the roof. Why? What's on the roof? Just go to the roof. So I do. I go to the roof, and the roof is turfed over. It's not a roof. It's a hillside, and on the hillside there's a pond. There's all kinds of stuff, but what I key in on is there's a pond full of koi, giant carp, goldfish, basically, and there's a bridge over the pond where you can stand and look down at the koi in this pond. And suddenly my bad day is actually getting a lot better. I reach in my pocket and pull out a book that my friend just gave me an hour ago, The Parables of Zhuangzi. And I read the parable of Zhuangzi, where Zhuangzi and his friend are standing on a bridge over a river, looking down at the koi, wondering if those fish are happy. And here I am feeling much happier. And that's an indelible memory in my little head. So if you ask me to remember a fish, I have this whole song and dance that I guarantee I'm going to be able to recall because it's so important to me, and that is deep processing. So the next thing to do is teach you how to read a textbook with all this in mind. What you need is a software upgrade, okay? What do you know about software upgrades? You probably know that they happen at inconvenient times. Is now the time to do a software upgrade in the middle of a school term? No. Is there a better time to do it? Also no. Like, the best time to plant a tree is 40 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is now. That's where we are. We're now, right? So let's work on it. The issue is that your software has been good enough up until now. Reading high school level stuff you've gotten through, or whatever training manuals or whatever they gave you in the military, it's been good enough. But now you read the textbook, and probably what's happening, college level material, is you're reading a paragraph and you're just not understanding it. You're getting to the end of a paragraph and you don't remember the paragraph that you've read. And so you read it 2 or 3 times, you get nothing, you throw it to the side. That's probably happening for you. If it's not, congratulations, you can skip ahead 5 or 6 minutes in the lecture. But probably it's you. You're reading on autopilot, okay? And autopilot until now has been good enough. But are you a good driver? I bet you say yes. because 9 out of 10 people rate themselves as better than average drivers, which is impossible. You're probably at least an average driver. But come on, honestly, half of people are below average drivers. Here's the thing. Have you gotten any better at driving since high school? And I know a couple of y'all are in high school, so like listen up right now. Have you gotten any better in the years since high school at driving? Probably not by much. Okay? There's this learning curve, and it goes from zero competence at driving to increasing to basic competence at driving. You take your test, you get a little better with experience, but then you flatten out because you're just driving around on autopilot. You mostly don't remember having driven where you drove to. You weren't there. Your motor cortex was doing all the work, and that's good. All right? Remember back to the stuff on consciousness. If you're thinking about driving, you're adding a layer of processing between perceiving things and taking action. And if you just let your motor cortex do it, you're more efficient. You'll get where you're going probably safely. And when you stop and think about driving, that's when problems happen, right? So get in a parking lot where you have lots of room and there's no impediments and light posts and stuff like that. Get up to about 20 miles an hour and then try to brake with your left foot instead of your right foot. What's going to happen? You're going to like that, right? Because your left foot doesn't know what to do. Actually, neither foot knows what to do. But the motor cortex for your right foot does know what to do, does it automatically, is sensitive, knows just how much pressure to put on the brakes. The motor cortex for the left foot doesn't have that information, and so it's clumsy, right? And that's what happens when you think about doing a task. It gets in the way, it interferes. So reading on autopilot is just like this. It's good enough. It's good enough to read Harry Potter or the morning paper or something, but it's not good enough to read college level textbooks. You need to upgrade the autopilot software, and then it will be good enough again, but it's going to be a pain in the axe to get that done. So there's that. How would you get better at driving? You'd have to be intentional, right? You'd have to go out to master drive in the desert and have them put the lift under your car that takes off half the traction. You drive forward at 50 and the instructor says, now stop. And you throw the brakes on, you skid out of control. And they laugh at you and you drive to the beginning and he goes, now when I say stop, do this, that, and the other thing. And you do it and you try it, but you're thinking about it, but you're too slow, and you do it 5 times and now you're upgrading, right? The more you practice, the more it becomes automatic, so that when you are driving in slick conditions in your car IRL, your motor cortex knows what to do. You don't have to stop and think about it, right? That's what we're going to do now. But you're not going to like it. Inform, transform, perform. Hopefully we've talked about this before. Remember when we were looking at brains and I said, don't literally draw it, metaphorically draw it. So come up with characters and stuff. Inform, take on the information. Transform, own it in some way. And then perform, put it back out in the world in a way it's never been done before. So pause the video for a second, get yourself a pencil, a piece of paper, and a textbook. Did you get it? Fantastic. So what I want you to do is open the book to a random page and read one sentence. Now that you've read that sentence, in your mind, I want you to stop and focus on that sentence. Read it again if you have to. And now think it through. What does that sentence actually mean? Now what you're doing is you are rephrasing the sentence you read in your own words. Maybe the sentence is, it's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. It's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. What does that mean? It means that your mental health is really, it would be weird not to have weird ideas in a weird society. That would be a way to rephrase that statement. Okay. So restate the thing in your own words. And now for the pencil and the paper, write it down on that piece of paper in front of you. Good, fantastic. And then move on to the next one. Well, how long does that take? How long does it take you to read a sentence, think about the meaning of that sentence, write it down in your own words, and then move on to the next one? Probably takes like between 2 and 5 minutes per sentence, depending on if you need to look up any words, right? How long is it going to take you to read a paragraph? Well, substantially longer than skimming over it the way that you're doing now, but you're not getting any information skimming over it the way you're doing now, right? So you might as well not bother. This is going to take a lot longer, but it's going to be a lot more productive. Now, the question is, do you have time to read each chapter line by line, thinking about the meaning of each sentence and writing it down? And your first offer is going to be not only no, but hell no, I don't have that kind of time. So then I'm going to ask you, do you have time to take each class twice? Well, the answer to that is also no, right? So as a matter of fact, you do have time to do this when the alternative is failing classes. Now, my class may not be all that challenging compared to your math or your biology in particular. They're gonna challenge you much harder. So it's important to get these skills now if you don't have them. The good news is that we are upgrading the autopilot here. Okay, we're doing a software upgrade. What that means is you do not have to do this forever. You're going to find that by the time you've done 2 or 3 chapters this way, painstakingly, slowly, you start to find that your brain now knows what it's supposed to be doing. It's paying attention. You are forcing yourself to pay attention to the information. You're learning how to focus on the meaning of the sentences instead of the words in the sentences and stay present to what it is that you're reading. And that's really what you need to do. So by the time you've done 2 or 3 chapters this way, you notice that you can take on 2 or 3 sentences, think about their meanings, and write down the takeaway for 2 or 3 sentences, and then a whole paragraph. And then by the time you've done a textbook this way, you could think about a whole block of text, like a section from heading to heading, and then a whole chapter. And then you find you don't really need the writing down part at all because your brain is doing what it's supposed to be doing anyway, paying attention and extracting the meaning from the sentences. Okay? But it's going to be a longer, harder job than you think it is. The more you do it, the better your academic career is going to be. So you're welcome on that one. All right. We're moving on to a second 3 stages of memory, as promised. You might notice that I have 4 stages in my 3 stages of memory, because this one is not really a stage of memory, but it is a prerequisite, sort of. That's why it's in brackets, okay? Attention is the 0th stage of memory. If you're not paying attention, nothing else matters, all right? You don't even get into the stages of memory if you're not paying attention. Hypnotism. Can a hypnotist make you remember things you don't otherwise recall? Answer, not really. If you weren't focused on that license plate as the car went by, you never encoded that information, and then no amount of relaxation and guided imagery and stuff can bring out stuff that you never put away, okay? If you didn't put money in your bank account, you cannot make a withdrawal, get it? You have to do the deposit step. Let's move on. The sensory stage of memory. Is this a stage of memory at all? For our purposes, yes, but we're talking about iconic or echoic memory. So what I want you to do is look over here, look at me for a second. And then when I say now, I want you to just close your eyes. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Now, close your eyes. And then how many things are on the walls behind me? Without opening your eyes, can you count them? All right. Open your eyes. Did you get it right? Did you see the diplomas, this weird picture, the calendar, this poem from a student, the books on the shelf? Did you forget some of them? What happens is information data is streaming in. It's being processed into information back here. You shut your eyes, you close off the channel, but it's still being processed back here, okay? And so when you shut your eyes, you have that brief, like half a second or a second when you can still kind of see what it is in front of you and remember what it is in front of you and extrapolate from there. That's called like iconic sensory memory. All right, same thing happens with sound. So listen to the sound of my voice, and then I'm going to go silent in 3, 2, 1. And just for half a second or a second, you can hear the sound of my voice rattling around in your head. Again, you're welcome, because we shut off the input, but the processing is ongoing, right? So that's sensory memory. Is that memory, so to speak? Does that have anything really to do with encoding, storage, and retrieval? Certainly not storage. It might lead to some encoding, but not really. But we're going to leave it there because it's in the book. So sensory memory. And then your short-term memory, that's the stuff kind of you can remember as long as you're thinking about it. Someone tells you a phone number, and as long as you repeat the phone number in your head, you can remember the phone number, a passcode, some digits, whatever. You don't need to recall it really, just to get the job done. Okay, so most people can remember about 7 or 8 bits of information, and that's going to be called your digit span. So in an IQ test, I might ask you to remember digits as I say them, and then like 8, 2, 4, 9, and then you would repeat it back just the way I said it, right? 8, 2, 4, 9, 4, 3, 5, 1, and then you'd say it back. If you say back 4, 3, 5, 1, we can move from 4 digits to 5, right? And if you get 5 right twice, we can move to 6. And this on the Wechsler, at least, this goes up to 8, and then there's nothing above 8, like that. And most people can do 7 or 8 in controlled conditions. Yeah, good. Then one way to get around that limit is called chunking. That's where you encode more than 1 digit in each bit. So if you live in Colorado, you know all of the phone codes probably. You know, you have 719 here, you have 720 is Denver, 303 is also Denver, is 970 like the Grand Junction side maybe, and then there's the 800s and the 888s and all that stuff. But each of those is just one bit of information, right? 1-800 is 1 bit. It doesn't take up any of the other 7 available bits, and so you can start to encode more information on a bit. The basic prefixes. Verizon used to own the 213 prefix. So 213 is so common that you can probably go 719, 213, that's 2 bits, and that still leaves you 5 or 6 bits to encode information on. Another way is keypads typically have letters on each digit. So there's a range of words you could possibly make with the given numbers in a phone number. If you want to call Talking Dead after Walking Dead on AMC, you dial 1-800-DEAD-LIVE. And the E at the end, it doesn't matter. You could leave that off because it's only a 7-digit number, but Dead Live is easier to remember than the 7-digit phone number. You only have to remember 2 things, and those 2 things are connected to the show, right? So that's chunking, encoding more information on each bit, okay? And then working memory, that's going to be sort of the screen upon which you project information so that you can operate in some way on that information. Maybe I want you to do long division in your head. So let's go. Put that pencil and paper aside, just in your head. Close your eyes. I want you to divide 128 by 37. That is 37 into 128. Begin. I know the answer. I know if you're right or wrong. I don't care. The problem's not important. What is important is that in your head, you are taking 1 to 8, and you're either drawing a line under it and putting 37 underneath, or doing 128 and then the weird bracket thing, and then 37 on the outside of that. And then you're seeing that 37 doesn't go into 12, and so you're adding the 8, and oh god, that doesn't help. So now you're multiplying 37 by random numbers and seeing how close you can get, right? But you're holding those numbers in your head and you're operating on them, and to do that takes up working memory. That's what working memory does. Okay, so that's your short-term memory. The components are digit, span, and I'm sorry, the short term is short-term and working memory. Okay, good. Anything else on that? Yeah, we could measure working memory also on that IQ test. What happens is I'm feeding you digits from 4 to 8 digits long, progressing through. But instead of telling me the digits, you're going to tell me them backwards. So if I say 4, 3, 8, 7, you're going to go 7. I've already forgotten. 7, 3, 8, 4, probably 4, 3, 8, 7, 7, 8, 3, 4, like that. Yeah. God, I'm pathetic now. I used to could do all the way up to 10 digits backwards and forwards, get into some alt testing. Because I'm autistic and the parts of my brain that were supposed to be processing like social relationships and stuff, and schedules and plans and a future and so on, weren't doing that. I was totally alienated, and so I have all this brain that should be doing other work that can hold on to numbers and repeat them backwards. The fact that I can't do that anymore, some people would be dismayed by it, but it makes me happy. Because I know that the parts of the brain that were doing that in the past instead are thinking about life. I have places to be and things to do when I get there, and people who presumably love me and who I love back. And that's so much better than being able to remember 10 digits backwards. Okay, so there's that. The third of the 3 stages is going to be your long-term memory, the stuff that you remember for a long time. First, the capacity of your long-term memory is effectively infinite. It's not infinite, but it's like 1 times 10 to the 500, which is a 1 followed by 500 zeros. That's how many digits conceivably you could store inside your skull case. Bits of information, rather. And that is, it's not infinity, but it's so close that as far as you're concerned, it doesn't matter. You want some evidence for this? At the end of the lecture thing here, I put some videos for you to look at, and look at the Kim Peek video. Now, this guy memorized like 90% of the books in the Salt Lake City Public Library, and every train schedule for every town in every state in the country, and phone numbers and area codes and all kinds of just irrelevant, pointless crap. He's crammed it all inside his head. And if he can do that, then, that just demonstrates that it's a really elastic capacity. You can fit all kinds of stuff in there. How are you getting it in? How are you getting it out? Well, those things matter. Absolutely. The second thing to know is that memory changes with aging. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that you necessarily get more forgetful as you get older. That's a stereotype. It's based in something. And the something it's based in is that the older you get, the more chance you have to get sick. Okay? Dementia is a disease process, not an expected factor in aging. But dementia is typically something you have to get old to encounter. 2 in 3 people will arrive in their 80s with no cognitive impairments whatsoever. but 1 in 3 people will start to show the early warning signs of dementia because of diseases, vascular dementia being the chiefest form of dementia, a stroke. The second most common probably being Alzheimer's, and then Parkinson's, Huntington's, AIDS-related dementias in the mix somewhere. All kinds of ways to wind up with dementia, but they're disease processes. It's just not something you should expect to happen. What should you expect? Well, it should start to take you longer to come up with facts because you have a bigger database to search, okay? So a young person, maybe you're 17 or 18 or something, you have a file cabinet. Bam, file cabinet. And everything you know is in the file cabinet. And it's well organized. You know, you've done a good job alphabetizing as you've gone through life. And someone says, hey, do you know a thing? And you go, that thing should be filed over here. And you open the file and it's in there or it's not in there. And you know whether you know it or you don't know it. Okay. So ask an 80-year-old whether they know a thing. Yeah. All right. So instead of having a filing cabinet, they have a room full of filing cabinets, full of experiences and facts and flotsam and jetsam. And honestly, the older you are, the less stringent you are about keeping up the filing system. You know what I mean? Things get, did I put that under G for gun or F for firearm? I don't remember. It gets weird. So you ask an older person for a fact, and you just have to give them a minute to think through, right, to sort through the files and find out whether they have that fact or not. What's relevant? When you're younger, some things seem really relevant. They seem to matter much more than when you're older. What did you have for breakfast? Well, if you're a younger person, you can probably immediately grab that bit of experience and you remember what you ate for breakfast. An older person, someone in their 80s, you know, ask grandma what she had for breakfast. She's going to have a harder time coming up with that information, probably. Why? Well, how many breakfasts have you had? Now, how many breakfasts has grandma had? Exactly. It all just sort of fades, blurs into the background. Unless breakfast was really routine, like I have the same stupid thing for breakfast every day. I have sort of Chinese habits, you know, and at least in this regard, I get a bowl of ramen noodles, pour boiled water over it, crack an egg on top. That's my breakfast, more or less every day. So if you ask me what I had, I'm like, it was probably ramen noodles, okay? And like 8 times out of 9, I'm right. So extremely routine, we have the same thing every day, or extremely unusual. There was something so noteworthy about that breakfast that it stands out in memory. So today was grandma's birthday, and for breakfast, you got her a gigantic hollow birthday cake, and Tom Selleck popped out of it in a Speedo singing her happy birthday. She probably remembers that, right? But breakfast, it just isn't important. There's so many. Ask people what happened yesterday. That might be tough. A week ago, maybe impossible. You'd have to queue to get there. But what happened in 1946? That memory is really available. Why? Remember this stuff. Neurons that fire together, wire together, okay? What happened last week? You've only had a week to rehearse. What happened in 1946, the important events that you take out and look at and go over again and again, you've had decades to rehearse those memories. You've slept on them, right? You've taken them out, you've recalled them, you've practiced them, you've deepened those neural channels to a great extent. So that information's readily accessible. Okay. So memory changes with aging. It doesn't deteriorate with aging, but your priorities change. You have had a long time to practice some kinds of information and not very long to practice other kinds of information, all right? And eidetic memory or perfect recall, not really, not really. There are some people who get mighty close. Kim Peek, for example, gets mighty close to the mythical photographic memory. but even he, when he was alive, was not quite perfect. Okay, so perfect memory, not so much. And would you want that? You would not. Let's see, flashbulb memory and post-traumatic stress. So flashbulb is a particular kind of memory where usually something really bad is important. Sometimes merely important happened. Something really bad has happened. And it might be that merely something important has happened, but usually bad. There's brain chemistry involved here. And what's happened is the scene is lit up as though with a flashbulb, and it enables really clear and detailed recall. Okay, so people remember particular events based on their generation. So my parents' generation, people remember where they were and what they were doing when they heard the news that John F. Kennedy had been assassinated. It's seared into their brains really brightly. And at least initially, they'd have very clear and detailed recall about those events. Initially. So there's two problems with flashbulb memory. One is the gun barrel effect, and the other is the floppy disk effect, I suppose we could call it. So the gun barrel effect. Not only is the event very, very salient, but there's probably one thing in the event that's more salient than anything else. So maybe someone gets held up at gunpoint, and that dumps a bunch of adrenaline and cortisol in the system, which really turns on the recorders. The neurons that are firing and wiring are wiring really deep, really hard. There's going to be lots of little receptor sites. You know what I mean? But what are they looking at? Remember, the 0th stage of memory is attention. And if someone has a gun in their face, what are they looking at? Exactly, they're looking at the gun. This is the gun barrel effect. So later on, they survive, they're not badly injured, and the police are asking them questions. Did you see your assailant? Well, I guess I did. Was it a man or a woman? I suppose almost everyone's one or the other. Probably yes. Which man or I can't, honestly, I didn't get a good look at him. They were 2 feet away from you with a gun in your face. You didn't get a good look at him. You didn't. You were focused on the piece in your face. All the details, their hair and their clothes and their skin color and their height. Really, the victim can't be that helpful in most cases. Because what were they focused on? The gun. But I asked them a question about the gun. Oh, it was a 357 Taurus Magnum with the blue steel finish and the extended barrel, and there was some scarring around the targeting reticle and stuff, because that's what they were focused on. Okay, so the flashbulb memory is clear and bright and detailed, but the 0th stage of memory matters here. The other problem is that we don't keep our memories to ourselves. The floppy disk effect, I guess we could call it. We're used to computer memories, and the computer, you store a file on the hard drive or the floppy disk. Floppy disk, it's 1980. And then when you need to work on a thing, you recall it from that permanent storage and you put it in temporary storage, and then you modify it. You pull up the paper you're working on and you type some more stuff in it. But if you turn the computer off, then the permanent source, right, the floppy disk or the hard drive or whatever, it's not modified there. And then when you turn it on tomorrow and call it up from there, it comes back without your changes, and you're mad you forgot to press save changes, right? That's not how brains work. I'm sorry, that's not how human brains and minds function. When you are remembering a memory, you're not calling it up from some deep permanent storage facility and making a copy of it and working on the copy. You are going to the neural networks that encode that information, and those neural networks are firing. Okay? So if you modify that memory, you put it away again, cause the neurons to stop firing. always though modified by the circumstances in which they were recalled, unavoidably modified, which means that your memories change over time. The event always unfolded the way the event unfolded, but the way you remember it changes. So let's go back to the baby boom generation who remembers where they were and what they were doing when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. And you ask them, if you'd asked them a week later, then those memories would be clear and bright and reliable and precise. And now they're probably bullshit. Sorry. Ask a baby boomer where they were, what they were doing, and the most likely story you're going to get is, well, I was a teenager and I was in school that day, and a voice came over the PA, and we got the news sitting in class, and then the teacher went and got a television and rolled it into the room and plugged it in, messed with the antenna, and we watched the news the rest of the day. And that's not what happened. Okay, a few people were in school that day, and that's how it rolled out. But some schools were closed for maintenance, and some children were too young. They weren't in high school at all. They were in middle school, and they weren't told the news. They weren't mature enough. And what's happened is they've taken this memory out and put it back a lot of times, and it's gone in there modified. They've modified it while they're looking at it. There was a show about this, about the 60s in the 80s. It was called The Wonder Years. And in The Wonder Years, the kid in the Fred Savage, he's in school and he hears about the assassination that way, and it triggers all the baby boomers who love the show. And so when they're thinking about the thing, they're thinking about it in terms of their memory has been corrupted, modified by watching this television program. And of course, they get together and they talk about their lives and stuff, and they talk about how traumatic the assassination was and share stories back and forth. And then their memory's so polluted now that there's no telling what really actually happened, where they were, and what they in fact were doing. Even in what year was it? 68 or something. Even in the 60s, principals were not so heartless that they got on the PA and just told people over the air, the president is dead, panic. When it happened at all, they went from room to room with like the guidance counselor, and they told people very carefully in a controlled environment, this is what happened, and this is why everyone's really upset right now, and let us know if there's anything we can do to help you with that information. It's not what people remember. Do you have real memories? I don't know, man. I don't know. Your memory's just not that reliable. It's not a computer. You're not as trustworthy as you think you are. So like, I have a memory. I remember when Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong took those first steps on the moon. I was 5 years old, and I'm in my grandmother's house in Mildenhall, England. Nana and Granddad, they have the chairs pushed together, and they're facing the television. And I'm over by the front door. It's cold outside, and I can feel the cold of the glass, and it's pebbled glass. God, I can see that door perfectly in my memory, and I'm walking away from it. And then the living room's over here, then there's stairs up, but I'm heading toward the kitchen, and I can smell the stale tea. They've been making tea in there for a decade and a half, and I can smell it. And stale cigarettes. And I know if I turn right and go under the stairs, that's where they keep the Legos. I have an uncle who's just like a few years older than me, and all of his toys are under there, and I can go and play with the Legos. I'm walking by, and Nana and Granddad and a bunch of aunts and uncles, and my mom, of course, is in there. And they're watching the moon landing. On that TV that's more panel than screen, the screen's this big and the TV's this big, right? And they're all getting radiation burns. You know the one. It's black and white, and it has, antennae sticking off the top. And I can recall the words on the screen with perfect clarity. You know, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, right? And there's a static burst, so it makes him say a tautology, one small step for man, instead of one small step for a man. The A is lost in the static. I can remember it perfectly. And I can remember Nan turning to Granddad and saying, from now on, we live in a world where mankind has walked on the moon. And it's beautiful. Get a little verklempt. And the major problem with this memory is it's bullshit. It's bullshit. I can't have that memory. How old do you think I am? How old do you think I am? The first moon landing was 10 years before I was born. Okay? I can't, it's impossible. It's impossible. Okay? What I'm remembering is probably the 10th anniversary of the moon landing. I was 5 for the 10th anniversary, okay? And the BBC rebroadcast it as though it were happening live. You know, they just rebroadcast the coverage and didn't interfere with it and let it go. So I'm probably remembering that. And when the movie Apollo 13 came out, I was in the Air Force and I was a space operator. Gary Sinise, who gets stuck at home and has to like do the procedures to build an oxygen scrubber and restart the LEM and stuff, I had his job in the Air Force, right? So I saw that movie probably 12 or 13 times. That line, from now on, we live in a world where mankind has walked on the moon, it's a line from the movie, okay? I can't remember that. It's impossible. So I have this memory probably of the rebroadcast all mixed up with the movie Apollo 13. And that happens. The older you get and the more that you revisit memories, kind of the less reliable they become. All right. So that flashbulb memory, yeah. But over time, it leads to problems. The let's say floppy disk effect, you know, memories get corrupted, and the gun barrel effect. PTS, I don't want to get too deeply into that without you here, okay? I have a long thing on post-traumatic stress. People usually find it really helpful, but I don't want to like trigger people and then I'm not there to help if that happens. So let's just say that therapy helps by exploiting these flaws in the memory system. You remember the thing and the thing was bad, but you talk it over in this new context, right? So you're talking about it and you're getting escalated and your adrenaline and cortisol surge, which is what is locking the thing in working memory to begin with. But you're talking about it with the therapist, with me. And in therapy, I'm a very boring person, actually. It's really hard to rattle me. I talk in mostly a monotone. And I am not at all excitable. It's really unlikely that anything that's happened to you is worse than anything that's happened to me. It's really unlikely you've done anything worse than what I've done. And so I'm just not excitable. I'm a rock. So you have the memory, but in the past, every time you have the memory, it's compounded by the trauma of remembering it, reliving it. But now it's in this new context that's calm and actually somewhat boring. So the memory is always modified by the context where it was remembered, but here it's safe and warm and comfortable and dull. And I'm totally non-reactive. So just telling me about it doesn't cure the PTS, but telling me about it 5 or 6 times, each time it's put away without some of the emotional valence that calls the adrenaline and cortisol to the fore. So every time you say it, it steps down a level in emotionality until eventually it's just another thing that happened and it gets shunted off into long-term memory where it belongs. So what's been happening is the adrenaline and cortisol has been keeping it in the working memory, and that's flashbacks, okay? So that's how we can work with that. And then how do I know if you've remembered things? These means. Recall is recall. Imagine a multiple choice test, okay? And I go, which psychologist believed in functionalism? You know, which psychologist was inspired by functionalism? And then you're just expected to come up with the name cold. It's a fill in the blank, not a multiple choice. It's a fill in the blank. And then, you know, the question, which psychologist thought of the thing, and you're supposed to sort through all the psychologists you know. Just cold come up with the name. That would be recall. The multiple choice version would be the recognition. So out of these four options, which is this, which is the psychologist who was interested in functionalism? Is it William James, Etta James, Jean Baptiste, or B.F. Skinner? Like out of that list, recall, recognize the one that goes in the blank. And William James is on the list, and hopefully you know that's the guy. And then relearning, this one's kind of weird. I'm going to give you a list of nonsense words, and you're going to practice them until you can say the nonsense words perfectly. There's like 30 of them. You got to say them right and in order. And it takes you maybe 2 hours practicing the list so you can do the performance, okay? You come back a month from now, and I ask you to say the list, and you can probably say a few of the words, but you've forgotten most of it because it's nonsense words with no meaning. But we practice again until you can say the list perfectly and in order. And instead of 2 hours, it takes 1 hour. And then a month from now, it takes half an hour. And then 6 months from now, you know, practice. It takes 5 minutes, and you can get back to the thing. Well, that's relearning. How quickly can you get back to the performance of the thing that you've forgotten? So the 3 tests for memory: recall, recognition, relearning. I've built a little videography here for you. So this is going to be the only lecture here for this subject. And you can pick 1 or 2 of the videos, watch those. They'll be really educational and maybe inspiring. I don't know you. I'm going to add something into the list when we're done talking here. I forgot about the forensic psychology lady showing memories unreliable. So Josh 4, this is a TED talk, and it's telling you about the memory palace. So one way to remember, one way to improve your memory for a certain class of information. Really interesting. And Kim Peek is the memory savant. So he was mentally retarded. His dad had to help him ride the bus and wash his body and brush his teeth and get dressed. But he could read books, 1 page with each eye, you know, in like 10 or 15 seconds. He'd read 2 pages and then flip. And he's practically scanning the stuff into his head. So he's a really interesting character. Clive Waring being the opposite, his hippocampus was destroyed by a viral infection, herpes, in fact, crossed the blood-brain barrier and destroyed his hippocampus. So he was not able to make any new memories. It gave him retrograde and anterograde amnesia both at once. So this is sort of the story of his life after the infection. And I'm going to put that forensic psychology thing in here. And that's it for the day, for the week. Do the reading, take the test, and I hope you're safe out there. Okay, bye.